listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shemaiah Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shemaiah Reed.
Welcome back to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today. We have another amazing show for y'all today. We have our guest, David Savage. He is someone you need to know. He's a global energy executive, author, podcaster, storyteller, outdoor adventurer, and over 31 years plus of experience in sales and business, not just local, international. He's going to share with us not just amazing story, because that's what we do on the show. We get amazing powerhouse stories to help you, the listener, and our viewers, because we're on YouTube, to understand the process. I mean, a lot of us want to hit home runs in 0.5 seconds, but a lot of us forget how to just pick up the bat and swing. You think that's important to learn how to swing the bat. Babe Ruth said something similar. He said, I'm going to paraphrase, I'm going to know how to fly because I was inspired by this. Babe Ruth said that you can win today's games with yesterday's home runs. So ask yourself, are you swinging the bat? Or are you trying to take shortcuts and focus on the home runs? Well, let me cut to the chase. We have David here. He's probably like, man, this is an interesting introduction. How you doing today, man? I'm glad you're here, being on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm very pleased to be on the show. I have a lot of ties to Central Texas and San Antonio. I worked with Valero and played in the Benefit for Children golf tournament for many years, and managed their account, across North America. And then I lived in Corpus Christi for 8 years, and so South Texas, Central Texas, and I was born in West Texas, so I'm from San Angelo. So I'm Texas all through and through.
When you think about the business that you've been part of for decades, what inspires you the most on what you've learned with the lessons, and what do you believe keeps people going in business?
Well, the energy business is a very interesting business, and, we're seeing today that oil still matters a great deal, with the war that's taking place over there and what's happening with oil prices and how it's impacting all of us with gasoline prices and everything else. So what I learned in the energy business was it's a global business, and Houston is the center, the heartbeat of that global business. And there's so many talented people in it. And, when you travel to other parts of the world, I would have to go to the Middle East, and, I was a little bit worried. Like, my first trip to the Middle East was, right, not in the middle, but maybe toward the whole ISIS thing was going on. I'm like, if somebody tries to grab me, man, it's on, and then so, you worry because what you see is, what you watch on the news. And it's just like what we've observed with the World Cup here. All those Europeans came over here and they just had seen what we show in the news and the division of our country and everything. And then they go, wow, man, Buc-ee's has all this cool stuff. And, we like barbecue. And, they find that the people are warm and friendly. And so that's what I learned, is that whether they were Muslims or, whatever they believe, Buddhists, man, people are just people everywhere. And they love their families. They want to do good. They work hard. And, building relationships is the most important thing to be successful in any business. Doesn't matter what the business is. And building trust is a fundamental first step, before you can build a relationship.
And speaking of trust in business, when you stay in it for a long time, whether you're the owner or you're in the corporate world, you're working up the ladder, there's a lot of times where things get serious. People have to zone in, lock in on what's important. And sometimes we forget to smile. Sometimes we forget about, like you said, relationships that we have to build along the way. And we're kind of like black and white. Is it helping? Is it not? Get to the point. But there's also a human side. What is some of the lessons you learned about building relationships and why it matters?
Well, I would say, just take Valero, for example, since you're in San Antonio. They were a one refinery company back in the early 80s. Just had the Corpus Christi refinery, just sold generic gasoline, and then they started buying assets. And my company, Nalco, we sold corrosion inhibitors, emulsion breakers, and things that were really important to their process. And so I built a lot of relationships there in Corpus. And then when they started buying and acquiring other refineries, those people that were the Valero, stock, if you would, they went to those other locations. And so I knew everybody in the whole organization. And it was because of those good relationships that I had built in those early stages, and as Valero grew to like 18, 19 refineries, they became one of the largest customers in North America. Well, we usually would focus on like Shell and Exxon, the usual, big names, but Valero became bigger than them, at least in North America. And so just look, the problem is that oil prices go up and down, and then the refineries, they have to, that's a raw material. So they have to pay a lot. Like if they're buying crude oil at $100 a barrel right now, they're not making a lot of money, so that's why we see the gasoline prices. And so it's very cyclical, and you get beat up, man. It's hard. They lay people off. It can be a rough ride, but I think through it all, if you just maintain your integrity and try to build the win-win, business opportunities and say, look, we'll help you, or we'll share pain a little bit. There were gain-sharing relationships. So the key is to focus on the value of the relationship, because that trust is something that's extremely important. In a refinery, you don't want to take a chance on blowing something up or, causing a fire. The bad decisions can result in very bad, environmental issues, safety issues. And so that trust is sacred.
Once again, listening to I Am Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, David Savage. Also said in the opening that you are into outdoors. So stay with me. I'm going somewhere with this. What are some lessons that you learned about outdoors experience that help you navigate challenges in business and in life?
Well, I actually wrote a book about that. So it was The Savage Path, a memoir of modern masculinity. And I use the term path. In fact, I happen to have a copy right here so you can see it. So this picture is, that's me on this trail in Glacier National Park. And what you learn when you go backpacking is, first, you got to stay on the path. You orient your map and you say, this is where we want to go. And if you stay on the trail, things are going to work out better for you. And I'm a Christian. And so a lot of my focus was, look, in my life, as I wrote this book, there were times when I left the path that God had for me. And that was when I was in the deadfall. That was when I was getting snake bit. That was when bad things were happening. And you know what? The trail up the mountain could be just 50 feet and I couldn't see it. And I'm struggling. And what I realized is that I need to get back on the path. I need to be in his will. I believe that every man needs three things in his life. He needs a will to obey, God's will. He needs a work to do, and he needs a woman to love. And so I kind of cover that, in the book, and it also has a lot of humor in it because of my Boy Scout background. I had been a backpacking guide at Philmont as a ranger, and then I continued to backpack, throughout my life with a lot of these energy company executives. And, you get into a lot of bickering when you got a bunch of type A people trying to decide there's a fork in the road here, and this one trail isn't even on your map. That happened to be like an elk hunter's trail that went to his camp, but you don't know. And so you have to learn how to debate things and make good decisions, because bad decisions, when you're out far from a hospital and far from comfort or home or rescue, it can be much more costly. So my outdoor experience has been super valuable and enriching, because you see wildlife, you're in God's creation. You feel like you can receive blessings and information from God that just fills your soul.
When you look at sales and how you had to communicate and capitalize on opportunities, but at the same time deliver and give results that, both you and the client are proud of, you also speak on a podcast as a host. So I'm trying to tie all this together is, what's some things that you learn about presentations, reading data, and also communicating to an audience with a platform that, is hopefully gaining value over time?
Well, I am retired, so I'm not doing that simultaneously, so I'm no longer working in the energy business. So my authoring books, and actually I was also very politically involved, and was looking at I was on the board of directors as the governor's appointee for the Brazos River Authority. So I'm real involved in water issues around Texas, which is a big deal in San Antonio and Corpus Christi right now with their desal plant issues. But a lot of what I learn in business is, number one, you got to learn how to take a butt chewing because, everybody has pressure on them. And so you're trying to understand, look, okay, my customer's upset. He's kind of blaming it on me. So I was the executive that would fly in and like, okay, let's everybody calm down. If we need to pay for something, we'll pay for something, but let's talk about it. Let me hear. And I would basically preside, like a judge. And then most of the time I would just talk with the customer. I would take the vitriol or the blame or whatever they're saying. And then, but I usually had done a considerable amount of homework up front, which came from my scouting background. Be prepared, man. It still works. It's a fantastic motto for everybody out there. If you weren't in scouts, be prepared. Because when you're negotiating contracts or anything else, if you're the most prepared, even if you're negotiating with Exxon, you can still get more and it can look like a bigger win for you because you do most of the work. But I would say being able to, take the butt chewing and just weather the storm. Sometimes you got to bat down the hatches and just weather the storm. Listen. You really have to focus on your listening skills and then restate it in a way that they feel understood. So that's number one. Then they're like, okay, he heard me. He understands. And then you get into the problem solving and say, hey, look, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. This relationship has been here for a long time. We have a master services agreement across multiple refineries, worldwide in many cases. Like my last job, I was running Dow, globally. And so, you don't want to break those relationships. So you're like, let's preserve the relationship. I'll go talk to, as high up as I need to go in my company. And if we need to make things right financially, help share in, something that we may have caused. And it's like being married. Look, you don't just go get a divorce. You say, look, let's work through these problems. And it's all about just learning how to listen and try to problem solve, without letting your emotions get out of hand. And then, you're always looking to the data. And that applies to the podcast world a lot. What I'm learning is, I didn't know squat. We were talking before we got on about digital marketing. And, I wrote my book, and that was in 2021 in the middle of the pandemic. And the only thing that I could do to sell books was on Amazon. And so I'm trying to figure out algorithms, and, now we have AI. And so there's a lot of things that you're trying to figure out. And of course, the algorithms change. And so you can apply a lot of your business acumen there as well. And most of that comes down to, I'm not going to go decide who I do business with or choose as consultants or resources from a website. I need to meet them. I need to know people, and face-to-face still is extremely important in building that trust for me.
When you look at the perspective of the current state of how leaders are acting today, what are you noticing with leaders that, we see on the news, politicians, not trying to get political?
Right.
What are some things that you're seeing that concerns you, but maybe is an opportunity to teach younger men?
Well, I think right now we have a leadership void, a large leadership void. If you want to talk about it politically, like I said, I was a national delegate to the Republican convention, in 2024, and I also was in 2008. So for 16 years, very, very involved. Now, we shouldn't have primaries that were as ugly and just full of negative, like between Cornyn and Paxton, just because it was recent. It was so horrible. They're in the same party. So how are you going to get anybody who's a decent person who even wants to consider running for office? Because I was being recruited heavily, like, hey, you're retired. You ready to run for something? And you're well, no, my wife and I watched the Kavanaugh hearings and she begged me, please never put our family through that. So what's happening now is we're just getting lower and lower quality of candidates because people are doing it for selfish reasons. So you can wade through that river of crap, when you're going through the primaries and the political process. And it's so much about money. But a real leader, like, let's just say at the state level, the party would say, look, we're going to get behind a candidate that we think has the best chance to win, and we're not really going to support these other guys, so we don't have this public fight outside the family. And leadership would do that. And this is happening in both parties right now, because you've got a pretty radical, socialist, even progressive left, and the Democratic Party is kind of trying to find out what they really are these days. So those are just obvious examples, and you see that though, in the news, and this polarizing, this reliance on social media. That's not the place to try to win an argument. You need to talk to people. You need to be able to listen, just like I've described, in the business. I think that leadership is missing, and I think the people that have it, the best skills, unfortunately, I'm not quite that altruistic to just say, yeah, I'm going to go sacrifice myself, to all of that. So we get poor quality candidates, and I think it's happening in corporate America as well. I think it's selfishness, and that's our human broken condition.
Once again, listening to I Am Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to David Savage. When you think about the potential, because let's get back right into corporate, when you think about the potential of someone who is working up the ladder, to your point, ego, selfishness, I think it's more obvious today than, I don't know, ever, but I'm young, so I guess I got more to learn. But it seems to be very out in the open, wild west. People have their feelings, they have their opinions, they have their, well, this is what my take is. It's always me. And it's never about we or the team or what's better for the company. What are some things that you think can help us recorrect that in the corporate world as far as realistic training?
Well, so I watch a lot of the History Channel, and this is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, and Tom Hanks has done this 20-series show on World War II. And I love watching that because you're learning about some of the world's greatest leaders at a time where we really needed them. So you had, Churchill in Britain, you had, Roosevelt here, you had Dwight Eisenhower in the military, then later became president. So what did those leaders do? You can study them and see what they did is they cared about their people first. You went and you spent time with your troops. I went to a talk. It was very interesting. There's a guy who was very high up in the Federal Reserve Bank organization. And he said, when I was a kid, I used to go to the Milwaukee Brewers baseball games with my dad. And the difference between the cheapest ticket in there and the most expensive ticket in there was $12. Everybody stood in line at the same restroom and everybody bought the same soggy hot dog, but you encountered one another, across all of society, everybody rich or poor. And now it's like the skybox, they don't even see those people. And then, the delta of just the price to the same event is tremendous. And so we don't really know. We let other people convince us of what an executive was. Well, he's making all that money. Well, man, he's got a lot of pressure too. And he's traveling all the time. And when you have a global job, you're working across all the time zones. In the Middle East, they work on Sunday. And, there's a lot of things that I love the 7 habits. It says seek first to understand, then be understood. Man, that's just a golden rule of good leadership. Let me try to understand, what people do. What we see today, and man, I saw this in spades. Every company that I worked with and in is leadership at a high level of the company. They bring in a consultant, and so they don't listen to their own people. The consultants go and basically debrief, the employees. Then they come back in, and then they make a recommendation, which is money wasted on the consultant, in my view. And then your people feel distrusted, or like, why didn't they listen to me? They're doing the same thing that I told the consultant. But then they go, well, we're going to have to lay people off, or we're going to reorganize, or all these unpleasant things. And they just blame it on the consultant. And so, it's like, take personal responsibility. I made this decision. I'm trying to take the company in this new direction. And I think this is the best way to do it. And you know what? If it starts to look like it was a bad decision, I'll admit that too. And then we're going to change course. We're going to have to get back on the path, just like my hiking metaphor. And so we don't have leaders that do that. And, the same thing happens, in politics where, look, we have these people that come in and do all these the Simpson-Bowles Commission was a great one during the Obama presidency. So you had a Republican and a Democrat both working really hard on reducing the cost of government, spent like months and developed this incredible recommendation, to the president and congressman, and not any of it was ever implemented. And so you have moral issues here, where, like casinos and stuff in Texas, and they're like, well, or the lottery. I think the lottery is an example in my lifetime where we didn't have the lottery, and then they're saying, well, you don't hear the testimony, you don't get all that information, you just kick it back out to the voters. And the voters don't know. They haven't heard that testimony. They haven't heard all that research. And again, that's just being irresponsible. So the first thing, if you're going to assume the mantle of leadership and you want the pay and you want the perks, then you better take the ownership.
Yeah. And with that, there's also pain involved in the process.
Yes, there is.
So my next question is funny, like it's almost like you were in my thoughts. But when you think about the pain that naturally comes with anyone who holds responsibility, to your point, when you're traveling, global business, different time zones, different cultures, different communication styles, pain can be good, but also self-afflicted pain can be the opposite. It can be bad. What have you learned over the years with leadership distinguishing between good pain and self-afflicted wounds?
That's a good one, because we all have those. We make mistakes. And then I made a mistake where I wrote an email to, the whole organization that I was responsible for about the client and the individual in procurement, that I didn't like. And then there was somehow he was copied on the email because we were having this meeting, and it made it back to the customer. Oh, it was painful. And they kept that email for years and kept bringing it back up and beating me up with it and everything. And so what can happen is, lasting consequences. All you can try to do is damage control when you have those self-inflicted painful events, and try to learn from them, try to grow from them, try not to repeat them. And then just, keep moving, put it behind you. Now, real pain, where you're just having to do things that are required by the company. There's new law, in the refining business, the regulatory environment is a huge driver of most of their decisions, and so when you have to make a low sulfur diesel compared to what you were making, you have to spend billions of dollars, to build that infrastructure. And then, so you're going to have to cut those costs somewhere else. And you have labor negotiations. You're trying to negotiate contracts with unions. And so there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of pain. But I'm not like watching this History Channel where Dwight Eisenhower is on the ship before those guys. He knows that 50% of those guys he sent in those landing craft Normandy are going to be killed. He knows that before they, get on. But he's in there looking them all in the eye, trying to encourage them and say, hey, I don't know that we could field many people today that would follow that order. They'd mutiny, they'd turn the landing craft around. They wouldn't go do that. And so, I think all you can do is try to walk with them through it. Just like, when we have pain in our life, Jesus doesn't rescue us from all that pain. Sometimes pain and suffering is how we learn and how we grow and how we, gain strength and endurance. That's scriptural. And so he walks with us, though. And, that's all we can do as a leader is to, walk with those people, through that pain and try to help them understand and help them, if it's a separation from the company, I had to do that. And so, you can debate internally, for the severance packages and things like that, and help them with insurance and, just do the best you can, to try to help them find another job, as a reference, if they are looking for another job.
Once again, listening to Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to David Savage. When you think about the opportunity that you had throughout life to step up whenever things happen, life happens, you still made some choices, some of them good, some of them not so good. But overall, you kept being resilient and doing your part. If you had words for young people today, based on your own professional experience, what would you want them to remember as they continue their own unique path in their career?
So I like a Mark Twain quote that says, the two most important days in your life are the day that you were born, and the second is the day you learn why. So make sure you know that why you're here, what you're really doing, because if you're going to keep working, stay the course. But it's really about knowing yourself. It's like, look, what gifts do I have that are unique to me? What purpose do I have that God gave me that can help me, glorify Him, and then stick to it. Today we have such a short attention span on everything, including jobs. Most people aren't going to have a 31-year career with the same company like me. You jump and you say, well, you're not paying me. And there's a lot of reasons why people do that, because, there was a generation before where the company wasn't loyal to the employee, and those employees were loyal, and then they got laid off or cut loose. And so then it's like, well, I'm a free agent. Look at the NFL every year. It's like, well, you're going to play me or trade me, or I'm going to go somewhere and try to get more money. And so, if there's not any team loyalty at all, the people you work with really matter. So if you're interviewing and you're thinking about changing jobs, you really need to evaluate, who you're reporting to. Do you have a champion that's going to represent you in those meetings when you're not there? I did that a lot, And so, you need a mentor, a champion. You talked about having a mentor before we got on, and mentors are extremely important. But you have to go ask someone to be your mentor. I'm not out there looking for people, but, if you come up to me and say, hey, David, I think you have something to offer, and I would like, for you to mentor me. And it would be hard to say no to that. And then you said, okay, well, what do you need? And I'm doing this now with multiple young men for different reasons, mostly through our church. And so I tell them, you're going to have to come up with our agenda, whatever you want to talk about, whatever you need, if it's career advice, family advice, whatever. And, but having a mentor makes a tremendous, tremendous difference.
Once again, listen on Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, David Savage. Man, time always flies by. It melts like ice on the hot stove without any another 30-minute answers. What would you want our audience to do, take action on, support what you're doing, and how can they best stay connected to you?
Well, I have had a podcast for 5 years now, and I have 150 episodes. My podcast is called Wrestling with the Inner Man, because the first fight we face each and every day is the fight between our sinful nature and our Holy Spirit, inspired divine nature. And so everybody's got that match going on between our ears. I call it on the mat of the mind. And so if you're struggling with anything, whether it's unforgiveness, whether it's anger, whether it's loneliness, whether it's addictions, there's an episode out there for you. So go check out Wrestling with the Inner Man. There's plenty of content. I just got a new website up called The Savage Path. And, it's the Savage, www.thesavagepath.com. And the first step is take an assessment so that you can kind of map where you plot your point on the map that you are here. Because you just have to begin. You have to know where you are before you can begin any journey. Just like, when you go look at those things in the mall, you are here. Okay, where's the men's room? And so that's what I can recommend. There's plenty of resources out there, and I'm here to give away as much as I can for free because I'm interested in helping young men, and that's really my whole purpose and passion in my retirement now.
That's awesome. Once again, to you all, make sure you go do that. It'll be in the show notes. And like always, David, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Shemaiah, very much.